Shangyin, message to Secretary Linghu. Clouds of Songshan, trees of Qin, far behind me now. I've penned this message for a pair of carp to carry. Don't ask his old habitué of Liang Gardens how sick he feels in these mauling autumn rains. So we continue with another poem of Li Shangjing's, and this one seems to fit the bill better than the previous one for what has become a rather stereotypical view of Li Shangjing as a poet. He is a bit, as we've mentioned in previous videos, he's a bit of a Chinese Gongora or Milton, as a typically baroque, dark and obscure poet of a decadent age who is generally believed to be untranslatable into other languages because of the nuances and complexities of his uses of language and his imagery and his cultural references. The poem we read yesterday, Night Rain Sent North, was pretty transparent, so a poem lamenting the separation of a husband and a wife, and the language and the images that were used were pretty straightforward. This poem that we've read today is also a poem of separation, in this case a separation between friends, Li Shangjing's poetic persona on the one hand and Secretary Linghu on the other. But this one is much more difficult to fathom. It's more culturally coded with references that need some decipherment. So let's start with some cultural context. Who is this Secretary Linghu to whom Li Shangjing is writing? Where is Li Shangjing at the time of writing this poem? So this poem was written for Linghu Tao. Linghu Tao, the son of Linghu Chu, was Li Shangjing's influential friend at the imperial court, although it could also be said that he refused to use his position to advance Li's career. So Linghu Tao is the son of Linghu Chu. He would have lived in the capital, Chang'an, and that is referenced in the first line of this poem. And his father was a very, very, very powerful man. Linghu Chu was one of the great eminences of the late Tang. He served in different positions under at least 4 or 5 late Tang emperors, and he was the chancellor, that is the highest civil servant in the realm, for 2 of them. So presumably, Li Shangjing is composing this poem when he's in the eastern capital, in Luoyang. And I think that gives us the general background of the poem. And so the topic is separation. There's also indifference to office implied in the poem. I believe I've read somewhere that Li Shangjing wrote a lot of sycophantic poems to this friend of him, like begging for help and support. But this poem is a little bit different. In this poem, he seems to adopt more the traditional persona of the scholar official who is not employed, and he seems to adopt a persona of indifference to officialdom. And there's as we will see when we talk about the second couplet, there's this allegation of sickness, which is probably, just invented. And it was a common excuse by scholar officials who refused to serve in the government. Okay, so the topic of the poem, separation of friends, indifference to government, but also very subtle exaltation of the poet. The poet is equating himself not only with renouncing figures from the past, but because of the images he uses basically in the second couplet, he is implying that he is like Sima Xiangru. We will talk about that when we get to the second couplet, but Sima Xiangru was probably the greatest poet of the Western Han dynasty. So the poet is saying not only that he's not keen on serving in office right now, and he's indifferent now to serving in office, he's also implying that he is, a super great poet. Which he was, by the way, although I'm not sure if as good as Sima Xiangru. So let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet and try to decode all those references that appear and that are pretty obscure. First couplet. Clouds of Songshan, trees of Qin, far behind me now. I've penned this message for a pair of carp to carry. So the first couplet is difficult. So first, it starts with two references, which in the original are a noun, a couple of nouns actually. That is clouds, song, trees, chin. So the clouds of Songshan is probably a reference to the location of Li Shangyin in Luoyang. Songshan, Song Mountain, we've talked about it before. I think it's the topic of one of the poems that we read in the anthology. I'm pretty sure it is one of the 5 sacred mountains of ancient China. I think Songshan is the one that is located in the middle. And it was probably in Henan and a relatively short distance from Luoyang. So this Songshan, this Song Mountain and its clouds are behind the poet. It also says the trees of Qin. Qin is the territory, well, it was an old warring states kingdom, the one that unified all the warring states, but it's used here as a nickname for the capital area, Guanchong, the land within the passes. So the poet is saying in the first line that he seems to be saying that all those things, the clouds of Mount Song, the trees of Qin, are behind him now. That is, he is indifferent to the clouds of Mount Song and the trees of Qin, or that he is no longer seeing them. But I don't quite get this interpretation that seems implied in this translation because of the comas. I think it makes more sense perhaps to consider the clouds of Songshan to be a reference to the poet, the trees of Qin to be a reference to the friend, and to only include a coma there after clouds of Songshan. That is to say, I am like the clouds of Mount Sung, and the trees of Qin are far behind me now. That is to say, I am now in Luoyang, I'm close to Mount Song, but also clouds in mountains always connote the wandering scholar, the hermit, who is independent from worldly ambitions. So he might be saying, I am like the clouds of Mount Song now, and the trees of Qin, that is, the trees, the capital, all the throngs, all clogging the capital area, along with its attendant ambitions, those are far behind me now. But also it could be, just I am here, and you are part of the trees of Qin, you're in the capital, and you're part still of that capital culture of competition and aggrandizement and service at the court. Anyway, the second line tells us, I've penned this message for a pair of carp to carry. So here there is a historical reference, at least from the late Han Dynasty, if not earlier. There are poems where letters are called carp. This is probably because they were put into containers in the shape of fish, and so there are some poems or texts that talk about cooking the carp, where they mean opening a letter. And this became, a conventional image for letters. So the second line is just saying, I've sent you a letter with this dark and probably seductive and slightly antiquarian and pedantic image of carp for letter. So first couplet really, what is telling us is that, we are separated. I am here in Luoyang, close to Mount Song. You are there in Chang'an, amidst the trees of Qin. And, that's far behind me now, that I am not only physically distant from the capital, I'm spiritually distant from the capital. I'm no longer interested in serving. And I've written you a letter. Okay, second couplet. Don't ask this old habitué of Liang Gardens how sick he feels in these mauling autumn rains. So the second couplet is a question, really, or a rhetorical question, we could say. And I think the gist of the question is saying, don't ask about how ill or bad I am feeling. I will answer you that I am sick, by which he means, I suppose, one way of reading this could be, don't tell me any more about positions at court, about possible promotions, inquiries about my interests, my ambitions, or my health, because I'm going to tell you that I'm sick, because, I'm no longer interested in serving at court. So don't ask this old habitué of Liang Gardens how sick he feels in these Maoling autumn rains. But those two images, as I said before, the habitué of the Liang Gardens and the Maoling autumn rains, those two images connect with a poem of antiquity of the Western Han Dynasty, Sima Xiangru. Sima Xiangru was, as I said, the greatest poet of the Han Dynasty, a master composer in a genre that does not appear in this anthology, which is the Fu, sometimes called the rhyme prose, the prosimetry, the prose poem, the rhapsody, which is a genre in between prose and poetry, although it is rhymed, and which was very popular in the Han Dynasty. It was starting to decline during the Tang, although it was still used, for example, in the Jinshi examination. It was one of the literary pieces that poets had to compose. So Sima Xiang was a great composer of these poems. Before he served Emperor Han Wudi as a poet laureate of sorts, he had served Han Wudi's uncle, the King of Liang. And the King of Liang was one of the feudal lords of Han Dynasty China, a brother. He was King Xiao of Liang, the brother of Emperor Jing, and as I said, the uncle of Emperor Wu. And one of the things he had done was he had been a patron of artists and poets and Fu writers, and he had invited them and hosted them at his court in Liang. So by claiming Li Shangyin that he is an old habitué of the Liang Gardens, he is putting himself in Sima Xiangru's shoes. He's saying, I was like Sima Xiangru, a person that participated in different literary gatherings and coteries. And he's very clearly patterning himself on Sima Xiangru as the super great, famous, and illustrious poet. And the last line again emphasizes this similarity. In his old age, Sima Xiangru went to live in Maoling, and he died there of an illness. Some people, modern historians, think it was probably diabetes. And the Emperor Wu, sent some courtiers to gather his poems when he heard that he was dying, but he died before the messages could arrive. So in these Maoling autumn rains, Maoling, as I said, a place just outside Shangyin where the tomb of Emperor Wu was being built, and where a colony of people were forced to settle. So these autumn rains, Maoling autumn rains, seem to me denoting again that the poet is patterning himself on Sima Xiangru and saying that, he is also feeling the Maoling autumn rains, and he's feeling sick like Sima Xiangru. Probably the sickness is, it could be interpreted literally or figuratively. Probably it makes more sense to interpret it figuratively, like a declaration of non-interest, of lack of interest, lack of willingness to continue to go back to serving in office. And this would match with the first couplet, with the idea that the trees of Qin are far behind him now. So he is no longer interested in serving in court, and he is really or figuratively or pretendedly sick, where his sickness is more an indifference, present indifference to any more worldly power and ambitions. So quite a cryptic poem to transmit that message, but pretty effective if you know and savor and appreciate all those literary references.